is indexing or database indexing today. It's an intro talk, so we won't go in depth. And if you're a database administrator, I'm sorry. So before we start, first, yes, I'm not a database administrator. I'm not an expert in this area, and I'm really lazy, and that's why I'm presenting tonight. Who's using MySQL in the room? You just let me know. Okay. Who's not using MySQL? Is using another. Okay. What are you guys using? Yeah, Oracle. I'm sorry. What? Okay. So this talk will only cover MySQL. PostgreSQL is going to work more or less the same, and the same tools will work more or less the same because we're going to use the explain method. So anyway, just to let you know, if you're using Oracle, I'm sorry, Cliff, you won't be able to do that, but it should give you an idea. This is just an intro talk, so it won't really, it will just get you started. You will still need to understand indexing. You will still need to do much more than that. And also, if you don't understand my accents, Patrick will provide you with the version at the end. So let's talk a bit about indexing. First, let's see what happens when we have a query, a MySQL query on the database, or an SQL query on the database, and we don't have any indexes. So here, in Ruby or in Rails, using Active Record, I might do user find by last name, and then I put my last name. And behind the scene, Active Record will generate this SQL command that will be sent to the database. And what happens is, now the database needs to look, or MySQL needs to look at each row in the table one at a time until it finds a match. And we call that a full table scan, and that's usually quite slow. It's not slow if you don't have a lot of records, but if you end up having thousands or dozens of thousands or millions, it's going to end up being very, very slow. So that's why we use indexing. And when you add an index, you basically give a bit more information regarding your table, and now MySQL can use the B-tree data structure, and it will just find the match in an easy way. It's basically, the index is like a mini database, if you want to call it. So when you do a query just on that, it won't go through the entire table. So you want to use indexing. And I'm sure all of you know that. So that's not really the issue. The issue is when to use it, how to use it, and we never have time to do that, and usually we're lazy. So often, our model in Rails will look like that. So here we have an Active Record model. We have a user that has many team members. Forget about the dependents, we don't care about that. The user also has many projects through the team members. So here we just have as many through relationship, something very common. And in our projects, we're going to do current user to get the user that's connected, and dot project, because we just want to get the project. Now, behind the scene, Active Record will generate this query you see on the bottom. Select project, all the attributes from project, and we do an inner join. Every time you have a join, you probably need to use an index, because now we're doing a big query. Now, if you do something like current users dot project dot first dot name, now you're doing a huge query. Now Rails is a bit smarter about that, and will do most of the work for you, but still it's a lot of queries, and you will want to make your database run faster. And MySQL will say thank you. So let's see how to know what indexes to create. Well, every time you have a relationship in Rails, like belongs to as many, as one, as and belongs to many, you probably need an index. Every time you have a join in a query, you need an index. Every time you query on something that is a non-foreign key column, like my last name on the first query, you probably need an index. Every time you sort on a column or combination of columns, you will need indexes. Now the problem is, it's great. Probably most of you guys, and I knew that too, the problem is when to find what to index. Because you cannot just say index database. You want to index properly, and too many indexes will also slow down the database. You don't want to do that. So you have a nice command you can do, and if you want to see how MySQL processes the select statements, you can do explain at the beginning, and it would give you a table like that that will give you a lot of information. And it's great, but when you're running Rails, if you have to go and get all the queries you're running on a database and do an explain on all of them, it will take you forever. Postgres has an explain, but I think there's a display command that does the same thing. I'm not sure exactly how it's called, but you have the same option. And I'm sure Oracle also has the same kind of stuff. Now, I don't have a lot of patience, and I'm really lazy. So I didn't feel like doing that on every single command, because I need to see what Active Record does, and then I would need to do an explain on that. You also have an option you can do. You can ask MySQL to just look at all the store queries for you, and then you can analyze them and you can see what's going on, but it would not really be really helpful. So we have guys that came up with a nice plugin that I will just show you tonight. This is how a lazy Rails developer does to get his indexes. So let's look at real code. I have one of my applications here. I removed the indexes just to show you. I installed the plugin. I have the plugin here, and I'm just going to start my server, running the application. Okay, so the first thing you notice is this is not part of my application. I have now this SQL critical overlay that up here. If you click on it, it will give you a quick feedback of what's going on during the action. So we can see that I basically have 3 queries on this page. One has a warning, and 2 were okay. Now, this is something you set. When you install the plugin, it copies a small file here that lets you put the different settings you want. So for instance, here I define the warn severity level, the critical severity level, and different other aspects of the warnings I want the plugin to give you. It's also disabled in production because you don't want to run that and database in production. It's going to slow down your application. So if I return to my application, I can see here I have my warning. My warning is actually red. You can see there's a small level. It tells you more or less where you're scanning. Severity 9 of 10. Wow, that's pretty bad. The nice thing is here, I can see what's going on. I don't really understand all of that, but if I click on message, it tells me I do a full table scan. So now I know what a full table scan is. I know we're going through the entire table to get my invoices, so we have an issue here. There's no index was used here. In this case, that means scanning 1 row. Well, I only scan 1 row because I only have 1 invoice, something like that in this test project. MySQL must do an extra pass to find out what to retrieve the rows is sorted. Okay. On top of that, I sort my invoices. So on top of that, MySQL needs to come back to find the proper order. So that's quite interesting, but that's still not enough. Well, that helps. Now we have the SQL query, so I don't even have to go and look for it. It's here. So I do a select, and everything from invoices where my client ID is nil, kind of set, so it doesn't make any sense. And I order it by invoice on. So that's not really good. I still don't really know what I'm going to do. Let's click on explain. Explain basically shows me a report of what's going on here. I can also trace, so I can say I'm going to ignore it. But looking at the SQL query, I probably need to add an index on invoices, and I'll probably want to index client ID and invoice on. So let's go to the command line, my terminal. Let's generate some projects. Migration, and we're going to call it add indexes. Alright, what else we just generate? Oh, there's already one collider. can go to my project, see first, go to my migration, indexes. Alright. So what you do here in the migration, you just do add index. And then the table you want to add the index on. So we said we want to do it on invoices. And then we want to index two columns. We want invoice on and client ID. So client ID. We also want it to be removed when we migrate down. Alright, let's now run our migrate migration. Perfect. Page. Perfect. And it tells us that everything went well. Now let me show you another small trick. When you want to add a lot of indexes, let's say I go to another page. This one is fine. Let's do this one. Okay, this one I have no problems. I will probably need to add another. I need to add another index. So I want clients on user ID. That's a foreign key, so I want that. So what I'm going to do is, since I'm in a row, I don't want to create a new migration for every index I add. But if I add it now, I need to rerun everything, and I really don't want to do that. And we added a small trick to Rails. So let me show you. Here we want to do clients user ID. So add index clients user ID. What I do here is I add it, but I comment it out because I'm running on Rails 2, and we have rec db migrate redo method that comes from the DB group. And what this does is basically rerun the last migration. So you migrate down one level, and then you migrate up one level. So it's going to run my down. So it's going to remove the index we just added, and it's going to add the two other ones. That's why I commented out the remove index, because otherwise it's going to try to remove an index that doesn't exist yet. So I do that. I'm going to run my migration. There we go. Now before I forget, okay, and I reload, and everything is alright. So when you want to go, you can go through all your pages like that, and you'll find all the issues. Sometimes you might just have a mass load of queries on one table, and it will show it to you. And indexing is not always the solution. Also, sometimes some of the queries are just way too big and too heavy, so you might want to refactor your code. Sometimes you really have to do these queries, even though they take a lot of time, so you might want to use some sort of caching, like action caching, fragment caching, whatever caching you want to use. But using this small plugin, I find it's a very easy way to go through your application before you go live, or when you realize you're just too slow and you don't have a lot of time. Just do that, put some indexes, look at use stats, and it should run way faster. Also, you might want to read more about indexing. This is just a reminder. I'll put that in the slides, so you can always get. We're going to put the slides online so you can get them. I would really recommend you read the blog post from James Clark, who is now a Rails core alumni. He wrote, back in 2006, he wrote a nice article about how to do the indexing for your database. Often in Rails, we have tendency to just forget about indexing because Rails doesn't generate the indexes for you, and it cannot, to be honest. So often you're going to ship your application without thinking about that because you have like 50 records in the database, and then you go in production and you end up having thousands and thousands, and your application will slow down, and you will blame it on Rails that cannot scale. Or maybe you should look at your database, or maybe you should hire a database expert. There is a MySQL performance blog that is also very good. They have a lot of good hints, and I believe you can even hire them to help you with the database. And we also had a talk, Rob had a talk a few months back that shows you how to actually scale the database when even your code is clean, you have the proper indexes, but you still have issues, then you can do even more stuff. And I would suggest you go back to the podcast and watch it. Any questions? Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I forgot to show you that. You actually get all of that in your logs. It's actually really nice. You get all the information in your logs. So you get that in the console. But you also get it, obviously, in the log file, so you can go back to that and look at it. I never tried that. There's another plugin I used to do that. That only does that. I'm sure you can do that in the config file. Inject views, you just return it to false, and that will remove it. But of course, you will lose all the warnings because in the console you don't get the warnings. Yes. On top of that, before, and I think it was fixed in the latest version of MySQL, MySQL was only taking one index, so you will not take in consideration the indexes you had on your database, and sometimes it was kind of random which one you would pick. So too many indexes will really slow down your database. You want to be careful what you index. Now also an index that could be more room on your hard drive, on the server hard drive. Now it's not really an issue anymore. It used to be a problem. But you want to be careful. You don't want to just go and index everything, especially in the case where you have a join and you recover all the attributes from one of the objects. You don't want to go and index the entire table. It doesn't make any sense. Some indexes really don't make any sense. You want to be careful. Still run some benchmarks. I mean, you can put your indexes, but you want to make sure that you gain something by putting the index. Ultra Sphinx doesn't, it's different. The indexing of Ultra Sphinx is for the search, and it's using its own sort of database for the search. It's not touching your own database yourself. So it's not going to help you. Actually, you're going to help Ultra Sphinx if you put some indexes. Because Ultra Sphinx, the way it works, it's a search plugin that works in Sphinx. And what it does, it goes through the database, get all the objects, and index them. But in different indexing, it's on the database. So you can search Sphinx, and it will return all the objects from your own database. So it's kind of a different concept. So does it make sense? Or? It will use it. Yeah, it will use them to run faster. But the indexing, when you use Sphinx or search engine and they talk about indexing, it's their own indexing. It's not the indexing of your database. Does that make sense? Sorry? It doesn't have... You don't do that. Now, if you would have to do that, if I would have to debug a lifestyle like that, what I would do is I would take a dump of the database and run it into my staging environment and debug it there. You don't want to run an explain on all the queries. Yeah. Now it's a huge overhead. It's way slower because if you look at the logs, when we do here on every single request, we do an explain. Every query will have its own explain. So that's way slower. On top of that, we generate some views and we get some AJAX stuff that get injected. And you probably don't want your visitors and clients to see that you're debugging on the live. Any other questions?
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.